It is a real honor to be able to join you today, and I hope everyone taking part is safe and well. It's impossible to begin a speech nowadays without mentioning COVID-19. It has had such a profound impact on the world, and its effects, without any doubt, are going to be felt very deeply for many years to come. But in real terms, it is nevertheless just one symptom of our dysfunctional relationship with the natural world. And we know that if we don't act now to fundamentally reset how we treat the natural world, far, far worse is to come. Because the fact remains that the world's ecosystems are experiencing unprecedented decline. Around 1 million species face extinction, many within decades. We lose around 30 football pitches of forest every year on average. Our oceans are being choked up with plastic. Its fish stocks are being exhausted at an extraordinary rate. Now, during the global lockdown, we saw a temporary downward trajectory in relation to greenhouse gas emissions, but there was very little relief for nature. In the first 4 months of 2020, we're told deforestation in the Amazon rainforest was 50% higher than the same period last year. And there are many other depressing and similar examples. We're undermining our very foundations, and it makes as little sense ecologically as it does economically. Because, and it shouldn't really need saying, but sometimes it does, we depend completely, all of us, on the world around us. And this relentless, rapid loss of nature is therefore it's a biodiversity tragedy in and of itself, but it's also a human tragedy, given the very direct dependence on all the free services nature provides, the world's poorest people in particular. And without serious changes, it poses major risks across the board, including, of course, and the topic we're here to talk about today, in boardrooms. For the first time in its 15-year history, the top 5 places of the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report were filled by environmental risks. And the WEF tell us that over half the world's economic output is significantly dependent on the services that nature provides. And in truth, of course, we all depend entirely for everything on the natural world. And a landmark study released in June by the Dutch Central Bank found that Dutch financial institutions alone have 510 billion euros of exposure to nature-related risks. And we're told that the annual cost to the world economy from the loss of nature will reach around $10 trillion by 2050. But one of the barriers that prevents action on a scale that matches the scale of the crisis is that so much of what nature provides us is simply not valued. And so much of the destruction of nature that we're involved in and many times responsible for is simply not counted as a cost. You take the Amazon, for instance, it's critically important on so many levels for human survival. We haven't even begun to understand the full complexity of the dependence that we have on the Amazon. But nevertheless, it's worth more dead than alive. Today, financial incentives that destroy forests outstrip those in favor of their protection by around 40 to 1, probably more than that. There is virtually no understanding about how nature-related risks are connected to our pension funds, our banks, or insurers. And the same could have been said of climate risk only a few years ago, but that has been addressed through the creation of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, chaired by Michael Bloomberg, championed by Mark Carney. But we need the same global effort for nature. Natural systems are vastly more complex than measuring carbon, and as a result, the finance sector struggles to understand it. We all do. In addition, and unlike for carbon, companies do not report their dependence on or impacts on nature. It's true that the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure includes some data on nature, but that's only when it's relevant to climate change, and nature-related risks, as we've just heard, go far beyond climate alone. For example, the risk of flooding increases dramatically with the loss of wetlands and the removal of trees and forests. Food production depends completely on the healthy soils that we are currently despoiling. As co-host of the next climate COP, the government's focus will naturally be on clean energy, zero emissions vehicles, finance, adaptation and resilience, and so on. But at its core will be a major emphasis on nature. So we recognize that you cannot solve climate change without also restoring and protecting nature on a massive scale. We know that these two crises are inextricably linked. They are in effect one crisis. So we will be focusing on increasing the amount of climate finance that is invested in nature-based solutions, currently a measly and inexplicable 3% of total climate finance. We want to ensure that when we recover our economies, as we all must, that we build back greener and better. Governments around the world have already committed $9 trillion to recovery, and how we choose to spend those funds will have ramifications for decades to come. We'll be focusing on tackling head-on the perverse incentives that destroy the natural world. As an example is the top 50 food-producing countries dish out around $700 billion a year, every year, on land use subsidies, often destructive land use. We need to see a shift in that. And we're going to concentrate on mobilizing the private sector to transition from being part of the problem to being part of the solution. And that's why the UK government is working with international partners to create a market-led task force for nature-related financial disclosures. It will complement the work that already exists for climate-related risk, and it will give investors, lenders, and insurers a more honest and complete picture of the environmental risks that they are exposed to. A working group of financial institutions, governments, and regulators from around the world have been brought together by the UN, Global Canopy, and WWF, and I thank them all for the work they're doing. And it will officially launch in the autumn. And the hope is that the task force will begin developing a standardized reporting framework for use in 2022. We know that to speak authoritatively on the international stage, we need to get our own house in order. So we've committed to doubling our international climate finance to 11.6 billion. Even more importantly, I believe, with much of the uplift being invested in nature-based solution. We've legislated domestically to be net zero emitters by 2050, the first industrial country, I believe, to do so. We're mandating biodiversity net gain for new housing developments. We're planting trees on 30,000 hectares of land per year by 2025. A commitment was in our manifesto. We're introducing a landmark environment bill to tackle air and water quality, biodiversity loss, waste, and much more besides. But we know that we can't deliver change on our own, and that's why we are committed to building alliances of countries and businesses that are willing to go much further, coalitions of the willing, of the enthusiasts, on targets to protect land and sea, on supply chains, which need to be cleared up in so many different ways, on land use subsidies, on commitments to net zero emissions, and to dramatically increase support for nature-based solutions to the major challenges we face, including, of course, climate change. This is the moment for a seismic shift. It's the moment for a reset of our relationship with the natural world. Coronavirus has ripped up and changed the rules completely. And the UK will do everything we can to help ramp things up. And we look forward to working with many of you on this call today to make that happen. So thank you so much for inviting me along today. Thank you for all the work that you have done and will do. And I hope the remainder of this discussion will be fruitful. Thank you.